Hello, and welcome to the first art video of 2024. Today, I am going to be leading you through a fun watercolor and felt pen activity. We're going to be making ourselves a learning portal for 2024, where we put our goals, our intentions, specific things we want to create. So I put keywords so that when I put this up somewhere and I look at it, it reminds me of my New Year's intentions. And that reminder sometimes is all it takes to refocus or whatever it is that you need to do. So this video is focusing on the step-by-step how to create the art part. And there's a separate video that leads you through some brainstorming ideas and explains how you can use the downloadable PDF that you will find in the description box below to talk yourself and whoever you're doing this activity with to get the words. But for this, we're gonna just do the paint. Okay, hope that's clear. So for this activity, you're going to want watercolor paper. Can't recommend that enough. Doesn't have to be super duper watercolor paper, but watercolor paper over cardstock if possible, because it will hold this paint and allow you to play with the pigments a little bit more, as well as your favorite palette of colors. Now, I picked my favorite palette, the colors I like to work with, and the first question my kiddo had was, when I do this, do I have to use those colors? Absolutely not. You pick the colors you like for watercolors as well as felt pen. I used a Sharpie, but you could use any felt pens that you have at home, markers, or even pencil crayons. And you're also gonna want a ruler. So for this activity, we've got paper, we've got paint, felt pens, a ruler, and if you have some paper towel, that might also be quite helpful for part of this. So without any further ado, let's get our supplies and get working on our learning portal. Okay, like I said, heavy paper, watercolor paint, a straight ruler, felt markers, water, paintbrushes, paper towel, as well as vision and patience. Good music is also a nice addition to this project, but totally not necessary. Okay, so for part one, we're going to do wet on wet. We're going to use low pigment, which means we're not going to put a lot of paint on our brush. We're going to practice blending and mixing using water, and we're going to do some layering. Have the patience to take the breaks to dry in between paint layers, and this will pay off. So I just started by putting water, not all over my page, but you can see I just kind of moved my brush and made a big puddle of water. It was a circle with some squiggles out of it in the center. Then I start to add little bits of paint. So there's not a lot of paint on my brush. I'm taking my time and I'm just adding in paint. I was practicing blending the colors that I like blending together and experimenting with letting it dry a little bit and then adding a little bit more pigment, adding more water, letting it dry completely, and then building on the outside of the shape. Your blob doesn't have to be a circle. It can be any blob you like. The idea is you're just using water and building colors in the water, experimenting with it. Move your paper around. If you have a watercolor block, then you can use that. I did. You can see it's still wrinkled a bit. If you don't have a watercolor block and you find your paper is buckling a lot, you can always use masking tape to tape it down when it's dry, and then as you paint, you keep it taped down, and then you can remove the paint when it's all dry for the final time, and it won't be too wrinkly. But that's only if the wrinkles bug you. So you can see here, I added layer after layer, having patience to let it dry. This is something I came back to a few times throughout the day. Letting it dry, adding layers, not too much pigment because we're going to be doing more on top of this. So I just did a very light amount of paint. I think I did about 2 layers because I just couldn't help myself. The last thing that I did that I think you might want to consider is using a paper towel on the wet paint, and I was removing bits of the paint to make lighter spots. You can totally play around with that too. And then I went back in and just did some blending, but I wanted it to look like my portal had layers. So I just used a tissue and traced it. Okay, once that's dry, you move on to part two. You let it dry really well. This one's called wet on dry. We're going to use more pigment. We're going to practice line making. If you have a small brush, use a small brush and leave spaces. Remember, we're going to be writing here. So we don't want to put lines all over every part of our portal, but you want to have some lines going out in all different directions. And maybe your pattern has more squiggly lines, more curvy lines, more twisty lines. I really liked the straight lines to start with, so you can start making your lines. Now I'm using the wet on dry technique. So my paint is wet, but my paper is dry. You can experiment with how much pigment, how much paint you put on your brush versus how much water. Now, the background is done in watercolor too, so you don't want to get too much water on it because it will change the background. That said, you can experiment with the brush size, how much water you use, how much pigment you use, what direction you paint. So I did a bunch of straight lines, and then I thought it needed some curvy lines because I really love painting curvy lines. You can experiment with the thickness of the lines. You can see if you like adding different colors to one line. Remember, you're not using a ton of water here. You can always add more water, but it's hard to take it away when you've used too much. So this is all about experimenting with your unique painting style. How do you like to paint? So create lines, leave spaces for your words, but experiment with painting lines. This is a very basic skill, but it is a very, very important one. And the more you practice it, the more confident you're going to get when you're doing other paintings. So take some time to practice painting the lines. What paintbrush do you like best? I know I have a preference for ridiculously tiny paintbrushes, but that's because I find it easier to control the brush, the paint, the water, all the moving parts. Whereas a lot of people prefer to paint with slightly more reasonable sized paintbrushes. So what do you like? It's totally personal preference. So practice knowing what you like, practice painting, figuring out how much pigment to use, all the things, and have some fun with it. Your lines can go out in all directions. I chose a center point, but your portal is your portal. So you make lines that make you happy, and you use colors that make you happy, and you know that you can't get this wrong. It is just for fun. So listen to your inner artist. How do they like to paint lines? How much water do they like to use? Once you're done your paint, let it dry real good, and let's move on to part 3. You're going to take your time, use a ruler. We're going to practice making straight lines, and we're going to build a pattern. That pattern is completely up to you. It doesn't have to be perfect. You're just going to practice making patterns using lines. So it's up to you how you do this. Some people, to measure and get it straight, they'll do a lot of measurements. They'll measure from the edge of the page. I just eyeballed it. And I used a permanent marker to make my first lines, but you may want to use a pencil to start. It is totally up to you and your comfort level with permanent markers. So I made my lines all the way around. I did straight lines. I guess your portal's your portal. You can decide how you want to do this. I made a frame. You want the frame to go all the way around all 4 sides of your paper. So I made my frame, and that first foundation of your frame is going to be your guide as you add more parts to it. And I just went around, and then I started to add black triangles inside of the green triangles, and then I added some teal triangles. I basically just picked something and repeated it over and over and over again. So I'm making this repeating pattern around. Now, I got this idea from Minecraft and the idea of a portal. In Minecraft, it's a four-sided frame, and when you go through it, it will take you from wherever you are in the game to wherever you want to go. So it's almost like a doorway. Now, I was thinking of an idea for doing a vision board, and I thought, why not make a portal? That's a lot more fun than a vision board because it's like you're looking, you can see through it, and you can see what it would look like and what it would feel like, what you want this year to look like and feel like. And so you make this portal and you hang it up wherever you want to hang it up, somewhere you'll see it, and you can refer back to it and remind yourself of all the awesome things that you're going to create this year. Now, while you're doing that, while you're making this pattern, I want you to listen to your inner artist. Mine made this ridiculously complicated pattern and it was repeating dashes. And then I went in and did repeating circles in between the dashes. What does your inner artist want to do? That's absolutely ridiculous, but it's going to look super cool. And maybe it takes you a little bit of time. Take your time. This is your portal for the whole year. You're going to look at this thing for a long time. And the more you like it, the more you're probably going to use it to add to it. And I think it'll be a pretty fun project. So take your time. Even if your inner artist wants to do something that takes a little longer, it's totally worth it. Okay, so repeating patterns all around, make it how you like it, make it bold, make it stand out, and then we can move on to part 4, which is to plan and discuss, get intentional, give yourself room to grow, feel some excitement about the year ahead, and then display it. Use pens and pencils and different artistic drawing tools to write your excitement about this year. Write the things you want to learn right onto the page. So you can see I'm doing this here. There's a whole separate video that walks you through this. You can always come up with your own, but if you want to go deeper, you can check out that video. I will put the link in the description for this video. But basically, once your painting is dry, I recommend doing pencil first. That's what I did. I wrote in pencil and then I went over it using markers. So I had a fine tip drawing marker as well as some Flair pens. You could use any markers that you have around and you are going to spend some time. If you don't have a whole lot to start, that's totally okay. You can make a plan to revisit this later in the year or to add to it as you get ideas. Put some words down that resonate with you, that make you feel good, that are your reminders. Put some dreams on there. Set some goals, set some intentions. Start your year off right. Thank you so much for creating with me. I can't wait to see what you create, what you learn, what you experience, what this year brings. Thank you so much for watching and have a beautiful day.